Today, we are diving into one of the most consequential intellectual battles in all of history. Seriously, this is a story about a showdown between pure, unfettered reason and divine faith. A battle fought entirely within the pages of a single book that would change the course of philosophy for centuries.
We're talking about a book from the 12th century, with a title that, let's be honest, pulls no punches. Tahafut al-Falasifa, which means the incoherence of the philosophers. This wasn't just some polite critique. No, this was a full-blown intellectual assault on the very foundations of the philosophical world at that time. And really, this is the core question Al-Ghazali was grappling with. You have to imagine this was an era of incredible scientific and intellectual advancement, but a new way of thinking was starting to take hold that seemed to push the almighty creator to the side. And for a lot of people, it felt like a genuine crisis of faith was on the horizon. So, to really get why this book made such massive waves, we have to transport ourselves back to the Islamic Golden Age. It was this incredible time of learning where thinkers were rediscovering and just running with the works of the ancient Greek philosophers. But this deep dive into pure reason was leading them to some conclusions that were, to put it mildly, pretty challenging. I mean, just listen to the urgency in Al-Ghazali's own words right here. He wasn't worried about some minor theological squabbles. He saw a whole class of brilliant intellectuals who, in his mind, were basically walking away from their faith entirely, all because they were getting lost in what he saw as deeply flawed human reasoning. So, who exactly were these philosophers, the Falasifa, as they were called? Well, we're talking about genius-level minds like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina. They were heavily inspired by Aristotle, and they held this powerful belief that through logic, through pure rational thought alone, you could figure out the ultimate truths of the universe. The problem was, their ideas about the world, and even about the Creator, seemed to fly in the face of what the prophets had taught. And that's when our protagonist, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, steps onto the stage. He was a towering intellectual himself, and he decided that somebody had to challenge these philosophers on their own turf. His whole strategy was to use the very tools of logic to show that philosophy, when it's not guided by revelation, will always, inevitably, just collapse into a heap of contradictions. And you can see his method right here in the book's table of contents. This was not some vague, emotional rant. It was a systematic, surgical, point-by-point takedown. He structured his entire book around 20 specific philosophical arguments that he was convinced were logically self-defeating. It was an absolute masterclass in argumentation. And the key to his whole project is right there in the title, Incoherence. See, Al-Ghazali wasn't trying to build a new case for his own theological views from the ground up. His tactic was much cleverer. He basically said to the philosophers, okay, let's take your logic and follow it to its conclusion. Let's see if your own ideas actually hold up under the rules of reason that you value so much. He wanted to prove they couldn't even be consistent with themselves. Now, out of the 20 points he argued against, Al-Ghazali flagged 3 of them as being uniquely dangerous. He said that on these 3 specific issues, the philosophers had gone way beyond just being mistaken. In his view, they had crossed the line into outright unbelief, totally contradicting the core tenets of faith. All right, so these were the 3 big battlegrounds. First, the origin of the world. Second, the nature of the Creator's knowledge. And third, what happens to our bodies after we die? Let's tackle that first one. So this was the first huge point of conflict. The philosophers, following guys like Aristotle, were arguing that the world is eternal. It didn't have a beginning, it won't have an end, it's just always been here. For Al-Ghazali, this was a non-starter. It was a complete contradiction of the revealed truth that the world is a creation, something brought into existence at a particular time by the will of the almighty creator. And for Al-Ghazali, this really got to the heart of the matter. Because think about it. An eternal world isn't really created. It's more like a necessary consequence, something that just automatically flows from a first cause. It takes away the element of will, of choice, of power. He also pointed out a logical problem. How can you have an infinite series of past events that has somehow been completed to arrive at today? For him, this paradox showed that reason itself demands that there must have been a beginning, which means there must be a willful creator who chose to begin it.
This whole idea about the Creator's will flows right into the second major disagreement, the nature of the Creator's knowledge. The philosophers had this idea that a perfect, unchanging being could only know perfect, unchanging things. Universal concepts like humanity. They argued that knowing particulars, like you or me or what you ate for lunch, would mean the divine essence was changing, which they saw as an imperfection. Al-Ghazali found this idea absolutely horrifying.
I mean, just stop and think about the implications of that for a second. If the Creator doesn't know you as an individual,
then what's the point of personal prayer? What happens to accountability for your actions? Divine justice, mercy, a personal relationship with the divine, all of it just completely falls apart. For Al-Ghazali, this wasn't an abstract idea. It was a direct assault on the very heart of faith.
And that brings us to the third and final point, the afterlife. The philosophers argued that our bodies are just temporary shells for our rational souls. So, after you die, the body rots, it's gone for good, and maybe your soul gets absorbed back into some kind of universal mind. But Al-Ghazali slammed the brakes on that. He pointed out that divine revelation is crystal clear. There will be a physical resurrection, with bodily rewards and punishments.
To Al-Ghazali, this was the ultimate example of philosophical arrogance. You had these thinkers using their finite human intellects to construct these logical systems that led them to just flat-out deny what the prophets had explicitly stated. He argued that yes, reason is an incredibly powerful tool, but it has limits. And when your reasoning leads you to contradict revelation, it's your reason that needs a second look, not the revelation.
So what happened? What was the outcome of this massive intellectual showdown? Well, the impact of Al-Ghazali's book was, and this is no exaggeration, immediate and absolutely profound. It sent shockwaves through the Islamic world, and its echoes can still be felt today.
The incoherence of the philosophers pretty much ended the era where Greek-style philosophy could just operate with unchecked authority in Islamic intellectual circles. It powerfully reasserted the idea that revelation comes first. It championed a new model where true knowledge comes from combining reason and faith, but with faith always acting as the ultimate guiding principle.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with the very question Al-Ghazali forced everyone to confront. Is pure, unaided human reason a trustworthy path to ultimate truth? Or, as he so powerfully argued, will it always tie itself in knots, proving its own incoherence and reminding us that we might just need a higher source of knowledge? It's a profound debate that, in many ways, is still going on right now.